Alright, we're going to try this again. I made a video yesterday, a two-part. The first part apparently got corrupted, so if I uploaded it as is, it would not have made any sense. So I'm going to try again, and hopefully this one will not die inside my phone. So what we're doing is we're inspecting oil pumps. Or at least we're going to inspect the one that I'm going to use in this build. As I went over before with the do-it-yourself balance shaft delete kit, the video I made was actually using this pump, and I later realized it's from an F20b. But internally they're fairly the same. It's just how they mount. Now this is a cheapo chinesium pump. I think it costs around $50. But this ring set, the actual pump set, is the one that came in the F20b oil pump, which I'm not going to use because I don't want to deal with using the rye wire harness any longer than I have to. I'm actually currently using it in my car because I had some problems with the factory H22A4 distributor, so I just used the F20b one for now. I actually have since rebuilt the USDM distributor. I'm being lazy and haven't put it back in the car. But I went over yesterday with this was checking the clearances on the oil pump. If you have an actual Honda shop manual for a Honda Prelude, the clearances are listed in the shop manual, and the page number is chapter 8, page 14, and page 15 will give you the clearances that you need. And all you really need to do it's fairly straightforward and pretty easy to accomplish. There's a set of feeler gauges, same that you would use if you were setting your valve lash. You probably already have a set lying around for doing that. So the first clearance we're going to check is we're going to rotate the rings around until you have two lobes, these two, that are perfectly lined up at their highest point. And what you want to do is slide a feeler gauge in there, and the standard new tolerance for that, for the inner rotor to outer rotor radial clearance, is 1/1000th to 6/1000th of an inch, or if you live anywhere else in the world, 200ths to 1600ths of a millimeter. So unfortunately my feeler gauge set, the thinnest gauge is 1.5 thousandths, so we're going to use that one. But since I've already done this, I actually already know where it measures. I did it in the video that got corrupted, so I'm going to do it again for this one. So we're looking for 1/1000th to 6/1000th clearance in this small gap right there. So first we'll start with 1.5. Goes in fairly easily. We'll go to 2. A little bit of drag on 2. Just 2.5 thousandths. A lot of drag on 2.5. And 3 doesn't go in. So we're going to call it 2.5 thousandths, which is within spec for a new oil pump. So that's good news. The next clearance we're going to check is the housing to rotor axial clearance, and you use a straight edge. I'm using this piece of cold rolled steel that's been cut off on a metal shear, so that's a perfectly straight edge. I do have, you know, straight edge steel rule, but this is from, you know, what I used to do for a living. I used this for lining up, you know, gear sets and stuff like that and large industrial equipment. So it's it's a little bigger than I need it to be. So we're going to use this piece of cold rolled sheared plate. And the clearance we're looking for on the housing to rotor axial clearance is 1/1000 to 3/1000. And we don't need the inner gear in there. It's hard to do with one hand. Give me a sec. And all we're going to do is we're going to lay the straight edge across this direction, and this direction, and measure the clearance in the gap created between the straight edge and the outer gear. We're looking for 1 to 3/1000 is standard, and the service limit is 5/1000. So we'll use this edge. Leave 1.5. One and a half goes in. 2. 2 goes in, but it's fairly tight. 2.5 does not go in. Yeah, it's really okay. So we're going to put it at 12 and 6. We're going to do the same thing. Make sure it's sitting flush. One and a half goes in. 1.5 goes in. 2. 2 goes in, but just barely. And so I note that 2.5 definitely isn't going to go in. Spin it around one more time. 1.5. 1.5. 2. 2. Yep, 2 is real tight. So we're going to call that somewhere between, or somewhere right around 2/1000s, which is within spec for standard new. And if you want to see the service limit, which is the maximum it can be, is 5. So we'll pull the 5/1000s out. Make sure your gauges are wiped off. You don't want any shmoo on there messing up your measurement. So yeah, not a chance. Not a chance of that going in. So we're good there. And the last measurement that matters as far as oil pump health is the housing to rotor radial clearance, outer rotor, radial clearance, and that is 4/1000 to 7/1000 of an inch. For everyone else in the world, that's 1/10 of a millimeter to 19/100ths of a millimeter. And all you have to do is measure the space that you have between the housing and the rotor. It will move a little bit, and that's fine, because you really, when you measure this side, it's going to push that way, and when you measure this side, it's going to push this way, and that's actually the clearance you're looking for. So we're going to start. See if I can. Okay. I know I have a 4. Hold on. Let me dig that bad boy out of here. There's a 3. Alright. 4. So 4 to 7 thousandths. Four doesn't even go in, so we're actually fairly tight, a little bit on the tight side on that. Let's try 3. Okay, 3 goes in. So somewhere between 3 and 4 thousandths. I do not have a 3.5, so I can't test for that. So we're going to say that's perfectly in spec. So right now, with the chinesium pump housing and the F20b rotors, or pump gears, whatever you want to call them, everything is well within spec. Come on. There we go. Everything is well within spec, so I'm not concerned with running this the way it's set up right now. And I went over in the video yesterday in the beginning, an oil pump in an engine build that you want to last is not something that you should overlook, because if this fails, the whole engine is going to fail. So it's a really important part of the equation. And I'm not a professional engine builder. I don't claim to be a professional engine builder. But if you ask one how important an oil pump is to an engine build, they might say it's the most important part of an engine build. Sorry. It doesn't matter how much money you spend on bearings or rods or pistons or valves or your valve train or anything like that. If your oil pump fails, the whole build is trash. Obviously, that should be fairly self-explanatory. So we're going to take these gears out. You can put them back in a bag. I'm going to keep them nice and safe. Oh, before I do that, yesterday I went over the video that got messed up. The difference between the factory OEM rotors and the chinesium ones. Give me 1 second. Hold on that. I didn't actually think of using this yesterday. This is a hand loading scale. It's a hand loading scale used for making your own ammunition. Okay, mode. What are we on? Count, oh, grams. Okay. Let's just check to see. We're going to call that close enough. This is actually 100 gram calibration weight. I didn't actually check, so I don't know how this is going to play out. The cheaper gears, I noticed when I had to heat the screws up to take this top plate off, these gears actually sweated oil, which is not something that I saw the gears from the F20b pump do, or the ones from the F22 pump. So well, that's unfortunate. It's off the scale, so I'm not going to be able to use that. But these do feel, this set does feel significantly lighter than the set from the F20b. And that concerns me, because anybody who has been in the Honda community for a while knows that under high horsepower stresses, even the factory gears can fail. I've heard and seen stories, read horror stories of them just shattering. And for a long time, there was a company that would make aftermarket gear sets out of like forged metal to use in those instead of just the standard metal that they use. I'm not really sure what they're made out of. Hardness wise, they both filed, so they're both sets are softer than a standard file, but any more than that I can't tell you because I don't have a hardness testing set. The other thing I went over was porting the oil pumps, and you hear that a lot. Porting the pump, you know, increases oil flow. And it's if you're building an engine that you're going to, especially if you're going to build a turbo engine, you're going to need that extra oiling capacity to feed your turbocharger. And if you're building a high horsepower engine, you're probably going to have slightly wider, not super huge, but slightly wider than stock bearing clearances, so you might want to run a thicker oil, and that's going to be a little bit more taxing on your pump as well, so you're going to need more flow. And all porting does, unfortunately I've already done it on this one because I thought I was recording yesterday when I wasn't, is you're making this hole here where the oil exits the pump, you're making this hole larger. It's actually on the chinesium pump, it was actually significantly larger than the factory pump of either the F22 or the F20b. So you make this hole bigger, then you use whatever tools you have available, whether it's a file. I actually used a Dremel and carefully broke this edge, the sharp edge here, this sharp edge here, and this one here, so the oil can flow out of this hole easier and flow into this hole easier. And that will increase overall oil flow, but it'll decrease your overall oil pressure. And these cars can be fairly sensitive to oil pressure. And what you want to do to make up for that is shim this. This is the pressure relief valve. This is the spring. This is the plunger. And this is the housing. And all this does, this plunger goes in here and it sits like this. You know, the oil comes up through the pickup tube and gets pressurized on the way out of the pump. If it reaches a certain pressure, it will push this down and will release the pressure back into the pump rather than sending it all to the engine. If you have oil pressure that's too high, you will start to blow out oil seals that are pressurized. Now, there isn't a whole lot in the H22, but the main, there's an O-ring in the center cap in the mains. That's a pressurized O-ring. There's some pressurized O-rings in the head, especially as far as VTEC is involved. So you want a little bit more oil pressure, but you don't want massive amounts, or you're going to start leaking oil. And you'll actually blow those O-rings out, and then you'll end up with less oil pressure. So all you do to shim this out is you find a washer that will either drop into this plunger or sit on the plug. This is the base that the stand or the spring sits on. So you either want to find a washer that fits around that. I measured it yesterday. It's slightly bigger than 1/4 of an inch. So if you find a washer that's pretty close, you could just drill it out with like a 9/32 and it would drop on there just fine. You don't want to go a whole lot, like one standard thickness washer, more than enough. You'll probably get 5 psi on idle, and at wide open throttle significantly more than that, probably closer to 15. I don't mind the radio playing in the background. Hopefully I won't get in trouble from YouTube, because I'm not actually, you know, playing music that I own. I'm just have the radio going. If you can see, I smooth this edge out here. This one is smoothed out here, and also that edge there. You don't need to go overboard. You're not making huge improvements in the port size. Really, all you want to do is break the sharp edges and allow the oil to flow a little bit smoother. There's definitely a, you know, diminishing returns in the amount of work you put into this compared to the amount of benefit you get from doing it. So just, you know, breaking the sharp edges is enough to increase the flow where you need it to be for pretty much every engine build. But if you're going to go super high horsepower, then you'll probably block off the whole oil pump anyway and go with the dry sump system. But this is more towards, you know, lower range horsepower. And these days, anybody that's trying to shoot for high horsepower in a Honda is probably going to do a J series swap or a K series swap anyway. So this is a little bit more, you know, old school as far as Hondas go. I did want to bring up, and I did bring up in the video yesterday, if you buy one of these pumps and you're not sure whether you've got an OEM pump or a chinesium pump, especially if you buy it off of, you know, Joe down the street that had an extra pump and then he charged you, you know, $150 and said it was OEM. There's some pretty easy ways to tell. An OEM pump will have a Yamada stamp on it somewhere. It'll either look like this one, which is what the H22 one looks like as well, or this is the grimy F20b pump, or it will look like that. Okay, those are both Yamada stamps. It will also have these foundry stamps, and it will have a QC pass stamp. And the F22 pump has the same foundry stamp and the same QC pass stamp on them. The chinesium pumps do not have a Yamada stamp on them. They do not have the foundry stamp on them. And they do not have a QC stamp on them. So, you know, if you're buying one of these off of Craigslist or something and they say it's OEM and you want to be sure, look for those three things. So there'd be a foundry stamp or a Yamada stamp up here, a foundry stamp here, and a quality control OK stamp right here. Other than that, I mean, obviously, the pump is filthy, so I'm not going to put it together right now because it needs a good cleaning. The last thing you want to do is assemble an oil pump full of, you know, sanding grit and metal polish and all that stuff. You want to make sure that your oil pump is pretty spotless when you assemble it. The other thing is they're super easy to put together, and I can't remember if I covered that in the second part of this video, which might end up not even getting uploaded if I double everything. Outer gear, it should drop straight down. If you have to force it in, it's not going in straight. So let gravity do the work. It should pull it right into place. Same thing with the inner rotor. Just line it up. You might need to spin the outer gear to get it to drop into place. You can do that the other way too. You can put the inner one in first and then drop the outer one around it. Doesn't matter the order, as long as they both get in there and they both go in smooth. Now, before you put the cover plate on, you want to pack the pump full of grease. So these openings, you want to pack this area full of grease. You don't have to worry about this area too much because this is just the pressure relief port. But you want to pack this area full of grease, like maybe to about here. And what that'll do is that'll help with initial suction from the pickup tube. When you go to prime the pump, it'll already be pretty much primed. And you know, you do want to build up oil pressure in your engine by cranking it with, you know, the fuel pump fuse pulled out and your ignition disabled. So all you're doing is cranking it, and you want to continue cranking it until you build up decent oil pressure, because you don't want to start a rebuilt engine that only has assembly lube in it and run it like that. That will wear your engine out really quickly. The assembly lube is in there to aid in assembly and to lubricate the parts momentarily while you build up oil pressure before you start the engine. I think that is all I wanted to cover. So I'm going to end this video here and give it a quick watch, make sure it got everything, and then I'll start uploading it later tonight.